Hello, friends and viewers. How are you? Have a nice day. Nice to see you again. Today, we are going to read the poem of the great English novelist, short story writer, and a poet, Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde is a renowned novelist and a well known literary person in the history of English literature. So today we are going to read uh, one of his best poetry, which I think so. The name of this poem is The Ballad of Reading Gaol. So this poetry is written in exile in Berneville-le-Grand after his release from Reading Gaol on 19th of May 1897. Wilde had been incarcerated in Reading after being convicted of gross indecency with other men in 1895 and sentenced to 2 years hard labor in prison. During his imprisonment on Tuesday, 7th of July 1896, a hanging took place. Charles Thomas Woolridge had been a trooper in a Royal Horse Guard. He was convicted of cutting the throat of his wife, Laura Ellen, earlier that year of Clever near Windsor. He was aged 30 when executed. Wilde wrote the poem while staying with Robert Ross. The poem narrates the execution of Woolridge. It moves from an objective storytelling to symbolic identification. With the prison as a whole, the poem highlights the brutalization of the punishment that all convicts share. So let us read the name of this poem written by Oscar Wilde, the very famous poet Oscar Wilde. The name of this poem is Ballad of Reading Gaol. So let us read. This is a very interesting poetry written in a prison while serving his sentence. He did not wear his scarlet coat, for blood and wine are red, and blood and wine were on his hands when they found him with the dead, the poor dead woman whom he loved and murdered in her bed. He walked amongst the trial men in a suit of shabby grey, a cricket cap on his head, and his step seemed light and gay. But I never saw a man who looked so wistfully at the day. I never saw a man who looked with such a wistful eye upon that little tent of blue which prisoners call the sky, and at every drifting cloud that went with sail of silver by. I walked with other soul in pain within another ring, and was wondering if man had done a great or little thing, when a voice behind me whispered low, that fellow got to swing. Dear Christ, the very prison walls suddenly seemed to reel, and the sky above my head became like a cascade of scorching steel, and though I was a soul in pain, my pain I could not feel. I only knew what haunted thought quickened his step, and why. He looked upon the garish day with such a wistful eye, The man had killed the thing he loved, and so he had to die. Yet each man kills the things he loves, but each let this be heard. Some do it with a bitter look, some with flattering word. The coward does it with a kiss, the brave man with a sword. Some kill their love when they are young, and some when they are old. Some strangle with the hands of lust, some with the hands of gold. The kindest use a knife because the dead so soon grow cold. Some love too little, some too long. Some sell and others buy. Some do the deed with many tears, and some without a sigh. For each man kills the thing he loves, yet each man does not die. He does not die a death of shame on a day of dark disgrace, nor have a cloth upon his face, nor have a nose about his neck, nor drop feet foremost through the floor into an empty space. He does not sit with silent men who watch him night and day, who watch him when he tries to weep and when he tries to pray, who watch him lest himself should rob the prison of its prey. He does not wake at dawn to see dread fingers throng his room, the shivering chaplain robed in white, the sheriff stern with gloom, and the governor all in shiny black with the yellow face of doom, with the yellow face of doom. He does not bend his head to hear the burial office read, nor while the anguish of his soul tells him he is not dead, cross his own coffin as he moves into the hideous shed. He does not stare upon the ear through a little roof of glass. He does not pray with lips of clay for his agony to pass, nor feel upon his shuddering cheek the kiss of Chiapas. I never saw a man who looked with such a wistful eye upon that little tent of blue, upon that little tent of blue which prisoners call the sky. And at every wandering cloud that trailed its reveled fleece by, he did not wring his hands as do those wistless men who dare to try to rear the changeling hope in the cave of black despair. He only looked upon the sun and drank the morning air. It's sweet to dance to violin when love and life are fear, to dance to flutes, to dance to lutes is delicate and rare, but it is not sweet with nimble feet to dance upon the ear. So with curious eyes and sick surmise, he watched him day by day and wondered if each one of us would end the same way. For none can tell what red hell his sightless soul may stray. At last, the dead men walk no more amongst the trial men, and I knew that he was standing up in the black dog's dreadful pen, and that never would I see his face for weal or woe again. Like two doomed ships that pass in storm, we crossed each other's way, but we made no sign. We said no word. We had no word to say, For we did not meet in the holy night, but in the shameful day. A prison wall was round us both. Two outcast men we were. The world had thirst from its heart, and God from out his care. And the iron gin that waits for sin had caught us in its snare. Or else he sat with those who watched his anguish night and day, who watched him when he rose to weep and when he crouched to pray, who watched him lest himself should rope their scaffold of its prey. Or else he might be moved and try to comfort or console, and what should human pity do, pent upon in the murderer's hole? That word of grace in such place could help a brother's soul. That night the empty corridors were full of forms of fear, and up and down the iron town stole feet we could not hear, and through the bars that hide the stars, white faces seemed to peer. He lay as one who lies and dreams in a pleasant meadow land. The watcher watched him as he slept and could not understand how one could sleep so sweet a sleep with the hangman close at hand. The warder with their shoes of felt creeped by each padlocked door and peeped and saw with eyes of awe grey figure on the floor, and wondered why men knelt to pray who never prayed before. All through the night we knelt and prayed, mad mourners of course. The troubled plums of midnight shock the plums upon a horse, and bitter wine upon a sponge was a savour of remorse. The grey cock crew, the red cock crew, but never came the day, and crooked shapes of terror crouched in the corner where we lay, and each evil spite that walks by night before us seemed to play. The morning wind began to moan, but still the night went on. Through its giant loom, the web of gloom crept till each thread was spun. And as we prayed, we grew afraid of the justice of the sun. The morning wind went wandering round the weeping prison wall, till like a wheel of turning steel, we felt the minute scrawl. O morning wind, what had we done to have such a cynical? At 6 o'clock we cleaned ourselves, at 7 all was still. But the sough and swing of mighty wing the prison seemed to fill, for the Lord of Death with icy breath had entered in to kill. We were as men who through a fen of filthy darkness grope, who did not dare to breathe to pray, or to give our anguish scope. Something was dead in each of us, and what was dead was hope. We waited for the stroke of 8. Each tongue was thick with thirst, for the stroke of 8 is the stroke of fate that makes a man accursed, and fate will use a running nose for the best man and the worst, and all the woe that moved him so, that gave that bitter cry, and the wild regret, and the bloody sweat, none he knew so as well as I. For he who lives more lives than one, more death than one must die. I never saw sad man who looked with such a wistful eye upon that little tent of blue we prisoners call the sky, and at every happy cloud that passed in such a strange freedom by. But there were those